you've likely heard of pharaohs and pyramids, of gods and tombs, of eternal life and grand monuments. But tonight's tale isn't carved into the walls of temples or buried beneath layers of gold. No, this story wins its way through narrow reed-lined canals, slips into the homes of midwives and herbalists, and clings to the most unexpected of things. This is a story about medicine. But not the clean, clinical kind we know today. This is medicine that was tactile, aromatic, spiritual, and sometimes, yes, quite strange. Among the many oddities the ancients entrusted with their health, one remedy stands out. One that might make modern ears twitch with discomfort, and yet one that was believed to hold real healing power. Crocodile dung. Yes, crocodile excrement. Collected, dried, prepared with intention, and applied as part of medicinal rituals that were, in the eyes of those who practiced them, perfectly sensible, even sacred. But to understand why, and how, we must step back into their world. A world where crocodiles were more than dangerous animals, they were messengers of gods. A world where illness wasn't just physical, but spiritual. And where the line between healing and magic was often hard to see. So let your mind settle. Let your body rest. And imagine yourself walking along the banks of the Nile. The river glistens beneath the moonlight, reeds rustle gently in the breeze, and somewhere nearby, a distant splash reminds you, the crocodile is always watching. Let's begin with a slow immersion into the daily rhythm of ancient Egyptian life, the sights, the textures, the sounds. And, quietly tucked within, the origins of a most unusual medicinal tradition. Imagine yourself waking up in a small, mud-brick home along the Nile floodplain, perhaps in a humble village near the Fem Basin. The air is warm already, and the sunlight filters through reed mats hung as makeshift curtains. Outside, the sound of sandals on packed earth marks the beginning of another day's rhythm. Life here is ordered by the seasons of the river. Everything, food, work, ritual, health, flows from the Nile's cycles. As the floodwaters rise and retreat, they deposit a thick black silt. It's fertile, life-giving. And yet, it's also the same muddy delta that crocodiles call home. Children run barefoot near irrigation canals. Farmers, known as fellahin, guide oxen through fields of emmer wheat. Women grind grain with heavy stone querns, humming softly, their arms strong from repetition. In shaded courtyards, old women crush herbs, measure resins, and prepare poultices from recipes passed down generations. And just behind these rhythmic activities is the presence of healing. Medicine, for ancient Egyptians, wasn't practiced in hospitals. It was practiced in homes, temples, and on the banks of the river itself. Midwives, priests, and healers. Some trained in temples, others simply experienced through life, offered their services with a mix of herbs, oils, prayers, and symbolic ingredients. Among those ingredients, honey, incense, myrrh, and yes, animal products too. The crocodile, Sobek, as he was known in deity form, was both feared and revered. He was a god of strength, fertility, and the life-giving Nile itself. In some towns, crocodiles were kept as sacred animals, even adorned with jewels and given lavish funerals. In others, they were hunted carefully, with danger always near. Their dung was more than waste. It was, in some traditions, gathered with care and dried in the sun. Applied to the body, mixed with fermented plant material, and sometimes used in the most intimate of ways, as a suppository, as a contraceptive, even as a poultice for certain wounds or infections. It was pungent, yes. But to them, it carried the essence of Sobek himself, fertile, primal, powerful. The preparation process wasn't random. The dung would be sun-dried for days, then ground into a fine powder and mixed with natron salt or plant oils. Some recipes added honey for its antibacterial properties. Others blended it with milk, wine, or crushed acacia leaves, ingredients believed to have purifying or contraceptive powers. In the cool interior of a small home, an elderly woman sits with a young bride-to-be. She prepares a small clay bowl, murmuring softly in a language shaped by thousands of years. The girl listens, wide-eyed. The remedy is ready. Not because of science as we understand it, but because of ritual, tradition, and faith. Nearby, hanging herbs dry from the rafters. Strips of papyrus are tucked into wall cracks, some with medical instructions, others with protective spells. The boundary between medicine and magic was not clear-cut here. In fact, it barely existed. For the Egyptians, disease was not just a physical ailment. It was often seen as a spiritual imbalance, a disruption of Ma'at. The divine order. A misstep in ritual, a curse, or a displeased god could all bring illness. And so, healing had to involve more than herbs. It needed incantations, amulets, and offerings. Sometimes, that offering came from the crocodile. Imagine now walking outside. The sun is high. You pass a canal where fishermen mend their nets. Children splash in the shallows, but always with an eye on the deeper waters. For in those shadowy depths, the crocodile stirs, a living symbol of both death and rebirth. Just as the crocodile lurks half-seen, so too do the origins of Egyptian medicine, partly practical, partly symbolic, and deeply tied to the land itself. And so we begin to understand, in a world where everything had meaning, even the excrement of a sacred beast could be seen as powerful medicine. In the next part of our journey, we will move from the humble homes and reed huts of daily life to the halls of priest-physicians and temple libraries. There, we'll meet the men and women who wrote these remedies down, and who believed that healing could come from the divine, the natural, and the unexpected. Let us now step away from the sounds of farmers tilling the soil and women grinding grain, and turn instead toward the sacred stone corridors of Egyptian temples, places where healing was written, studied, and whispered like prayer. Within these cool, incense-scented chambers, behind tall papyrus-covered pillars and beneath walls etched with gods and offerings, lived a class of men, sometimes women, too, who were entrusted with the care of both body and spirit. They were known as SWNW, pronounced somewhat like Sanu, the physicians of ancient Egypt. Often trained in temples, they were part of a larger institution where knowledge was sacred, preserved, and passed on like treasure. Imagine yourself in the great temple complex at Edfu or Karnak. The outer courtyards bustle with pilgrims, but the inner sanctums remain quiet and composed. Somewhere within, in a scriptorium lined with palm frond baskets and scrolls of papyrus, a young novice reads under the flickering light of an oil lamp. He studies a sacred document, an inherited text that contains hundreds of spells, prescriptions, and observations. This might be part of the famous Ebers papyrus, or perhaps the Kahun gynecological papyrus, both real documents that have survived thousands of years, preserving the thoughts of long-forgotten healers. These texts don't just list plants or instructions, they describe, with deliberate care, the balance of the body's elements, the causes of disease, and the roles of gods in recovery. They speak of blocked channels, of impure substances, of unseen forces at work within the body. The healers believed the body was threaded with vessels, not unlike the Nile itself, through which vital fluids flowed. When these were blocked or imbalanced, illness followed. Their work was to restore flow. Restore Ma'at, the cosmic balance. Among these prescriptions are remedies we might still recognize: honey for wounds, willow bark for pain, garlic for vitality. But nestled among them are also treatments that feel foreign to us now. Concoctions made of lizard blood. Applications of mud from sacred pools. And yes, preparations involving the dung of revered animals, including the mighty crocodile. Let's pause here with one such healer. His name has been lost to time, but let's imagine him, middle-aged, deliberate, respected in his small community. He's summoned to the home of a wealthy merchant's daughter who has just married. There is an expectation that she will soon bear children. But the family is cautious. Fertility, they believe, must be aided. The physician enters, dressed in linen robes, his tools wrapped in cloth. He recites a protective incantation. In his satchel, among bundles of herbs and small ceramic flasks, he carries a pouch of dried crocodile dung, collected weeks earlier, cleaned and treated with natron salt, powdered carefully. This is not a haphazard item. It is, for this healer, both medicine and talisman. He prepares a mixture with fermented acacia, a plant known even today to have spermicidal properties. The blend is shaped into a soft paste, inserted as a kind of contraceptive barrier. The ritual is accompanied by a prayer to Tauret, the goddess of childbirth, depicted with the form of a pregnant hippopotamus, her feet planted firmly as a protector of women. This practice, strange as it may seem, was grounded in a world where physical and spiritual healing were intertwined. Every step was meant not only to affect the body, but to align it with divine rhythms. Healing came not only from what one applied or consumed, but from invoking the right gods, at the right time, in the right way. Crocodile dung was seen as symbolic. It came from an animal sacred to Sobek, a deity connected with water, fertility, and virility. Using a part of such an animal in medicine was not just biological, it was spiritual. It connected the patient to the protective powers of the Nile itself. And this approach was not confined to the village midwife or the local healer. Even in royal courts, among the nobility and priesthood, such remedies were recorded, debated, and refined. Some physicians focused only on eye diseases. Others specialized in digestive issues or infections. And still others, often women, were midwives who combined ritual with practice in intimate, trusted roles. In temple schools, apprentices were trained for years. They memorized hundreds of remedies. They learned how to recognize symptoms, to evaluate the balance of the patient's body and spirit. They learned to measure time by the stars and to consult the appropriate deities for different ailments. Their knowledge was recorded on scrolls stored in the House of Life, a term used for temple libraries. These were not merely collections of books. They were considered living entities, places where wisdom dwelled. Access was restricted. Scrolls were read aloud in low voices, almost as if they were incantations themselves. In one such scroll, likely stored for decades in a dusty clay vessel, was the directive. To prevent conception, take dry dung of the crocodile, mix with sour milk and natron, insert before lying with the man. It pleases the goddess, and the womb is guarded. It is easy, from a modern perspective, to dismiss such practices. And yet, even now, researchers studying ancient contraceptives note that some of the ingredients, like acacia gum, have measurable effects. The crocodile dung, while more symbolic than pharmacological, may have served as a physical barrier as well as a sacred talisman. What mattered most, though, was belief. The woman believed she was protected. The healer believed he had invoked divine favor. And in a world governed by ritual, where misfortune could be blamed on spirits or misaligned stars, that belief had power. As we leave the cool halls of the temple and return to the warm night air outside, consider how far these early practitioners reached, how deeply they listened to the body, the land, and the gods. Their understanding of disease was incomplete, certainly. But their care was real. Their efforts, earnest. In our next chapter, we'll step away from the healers themselves and into the realm of archaeology and mystery. What evidence have we uncovered of these strange and sacred medical practices? How have we come to know about crocodile dung and its use in healing? And what secrets do ancient scrolls and buried medicine chests still whisper to us, after thousands of years? Let your breath slow. Let the sounds of ancient temple halls fade into the distance. We will pick up the trail of history again soon. Quietly, carefully, one artifact at a time. The desert is quiet now. Long after the sun has set, the air cools beneath a velvet sky pierced with ancient starlight. Somewhere far beyond the bustle of Cairo, wind whistles through temple ruins, and moonlight brushes the limestone faces of statues that have watched over the Nile for millennia. And below this silent surface, locked in tombs, buried in dry soil, or pressed between brittle sheets of papyrus, lie the clues to a strange and sacred medical tradition. Tonight, we descend into the realm of archaeology, the patient, quiet art of uncovering the long-forgotten practices of the ancients. If we are to understand how and why crocodile dung found its place in the medical traditions of ancient Egypt, we must first understand how we know what we know. It begins not with a discovery of the dung itself, but with the rediscovery of knowledge, specifically, the medical papyri that have survived thousands of years. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest medical texts in the world, dates to around 1550 BCE but is likely based on even older writings. When it was found in the 19th century in the sands of Luxor, it offered scholars a window into an ancient pharmacopoeia, written in lines of beautiful hieratic script. Over 110 pages long, it includes more than 700 remedies, some purely herbal, others clearly magical. Among its more curious entries are treatments involving lizard blood, dead mice, and yes, animal dung. But it is in another, more specialized document, the Kahun Gynecological Papyrus, discovered near the Fayum Oasis, that we find some of the most direct references to fertility treatments and contraceptives. This scroll, dating to around 1800 BCE, details the use of crocodile dung as a vaginal insert, likely intended to prevent pregnancy. The descriptions are not crude or dismissive, they are clinical, precise, and embedded in a cultural worldview where healing was sacred. Why crocodile dung? That's the mystery. Archaeologists and historians offer a few quiet theories. One is symbolic, the crocodile, as a representation of the god Sobek, embodied both danger and life-giving power. Using its dung was a way to harness its essence, its virility, its strength. To bring Sobek's presence into the body, perhaps to guard it. Another theory rests on a more practical consideration. Dry dung, mixed with fermented substances like acacia and sour milk, may have created a kind of barrier or even a chemical reaction. Acacia, in particular, ferments into lactic acid, a mild spermicide. The dung, then, may have been part of a larger compound with real, if limited, contraceptive properties. But we must be careful not to impose our modern categories onto ancient thought. For the Egyptians, the body was a spiritual vessel, and every substance was layered with meaning. Dung was not just waste. It was the product of a sacred animal, processed by its divine body, emerging from the waters of the Nile. Imagine an archaeologist, brushing away the dust inside a forgotten tomb, uncovering a small ceramic vessel. Its lid still sealed. Within it, the faint, aged scent of dried organic matter. Beside it, a faded inscription, perhaps a spell, or a simple instruction, to guard the womb. That vessel might once have sat on a shelf in a midwife's home. It might have traveled across the Nile wrapped in linen. It might have been used in ceremonies we can only guess at now. Sometimes, the evidence is indirect. A temple relief in Komombo, dedicated to Sobek, shows priests in ceremonial headdresses making offerings. In one panel, a small basket is placed before a crocodile-shaped altar. Was it bread? Incense? Or something more obscure? The carvings don't tell us explicitly, but the presence of offerings to Sobek hints at the deeper reverence paid to the creature and all it produced. Other artifacts include small clay applicators, hollow reeds, and mixing bowls, simple tools that might once have held strange combinations of honey, resin, and animal product. When found in female tombs, these items raise more questions than they answer. Were they used in life or prepared for the afterlife? Were they tools of healing, protection, or both? There are stories, too, passed down through temple scribes and copied again and again. Tales of gods intervening in childbirth, of divine beings offering medicine to mortals. In these stories, crocodiles are never far. Sometimes guardians, sometimes threats, always present in the sacred landscape of healing. One recovered papyrus fragment, fragile and barely legible, contains a hymn to Sobek that describes him as he who swims in the flood, he who brings strength to the seed. Such language suggests fertility, potency, divine masculine energy. All of which could explain why his dung, strange as it sounds, was included in rituals to control the same forces. And then there is the mystery of the House of Life, the library and healing school found in many temples. While no full House of Life has been found intact, references to them in various tombs and texts suggest they contained vast stores of medical and magical knowledge. Within their walls, priest-healers would have studied the properties of every known substance, recording successes and failures, combining remedies with incantations, always under the watchful gaze of the gods. How many of these texts lie undiscovered, still buried beneath temple ruins or beneath the sands of desert necropolises? How many references to crocodile-based treatments have faded from history, erased by time, conquest, and the slow decay of papyrus? Still, we piece the puzzle together. From scrolls cracked with age. From jars of powdered mystery. From the stained walls of tombs. Slowly, gently, the past opens its palm to us. Imagine yourself walking through the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. You pass statues and sarcophagi. And then, in a quiet, low-lit corner, you find a small display, just a fragment of text, a piece of old pottery, and a label that reads, medical vessel, likely used for contraceptive paste. Dynasty 12. You linger there, thinking not just of kings and pyramids, but of the everyday women and men who trusted their health to strange mixtures, sacred animals, and the enduring hope that healing was possible. As the museum closes and the desert night deepens, we leave the world of excavation behind. In our next segment, we'll journey back once more into daily Egyptian life, but this time, through a different lens. We will explore how the elite lived, how their medical practices differed, and how their access to rare ingredients, like crocodile dung, reflected not just health, but hierarchy. So rest now, if you wish. Let your thoughts drift gently down the Nile once more. The mystery remains, but with every ancient scrap and sacred symbol, we come a little closer to understanding. Imagine once again the rising sun casting a golden shimmer across the broad surface of the Nile. The river flows, slow and eternal, past simple reed huts, groves of date palms, and wide fields stitched with irrigation ditches. But as you continue upstream, something changes. The homes grow larger. Walls stand higher. The roofs are tiled rather than thatched. Servants move in hushed rhythm through stone courtyards, carrying trays of figs, pomegranates, and warm bread wrapped in linen cloth. The scent of lotus oil lingers in the air. Here live the wealthy elite of ancient Egypt, the priests, scribes, court officials, and nobles whose lives were woven not only with power and prestige, but with a different relationship to health, to medicine, and to the divine. To understand how remedies like crocodile dung functioned in ancient Egypt, we must look at more than just belief, we must look at who had access to such beliefs, and how they practiced them. For while illness touches all levels of society, the way it is addressed can be shaped by wealth, education, and proximity to sacred knowledge. In the grand homes of the elite, medicine was not just practical, it was ceremonial. Wealthy families often employed household healers or maintained long-standing relationships with temple physicians. These healers were not unlike family doctors, familiar with the household's history, trusted with intimate matters, and often trained in the temple traditions where medicine blurred into magic. Picture the wife of a high priest, adorned in fine linen, her skin perfumed with oils, reclining in a shaded room as her personal physician prepares a treatment. She suffers from a condition that modern doctors might recognize as endometriosis, but her healer understands it in the terms of blocked channels and disturbed spirits. A crocodile dung mixture is prepared. Not because she lacks access to better options, but because this has been trusted by generations of women before her. The crocodile, after all, is revered. Its essence, captured in the remedy, is believed to draw out imbalance, to restore fertility, to shield the womb from unseen forces. But there is a key distinction. For the elite, the quality of ingredients was higher. The dung may have been gathered from sacred crocodiles, those kept in temple pools and fed by priests. These animals were considered divine incarnations of Sobek, and their bodily products carried special significance. Some temples, like those in Komombo and Crocodilopolis, modern-day Fem, kept such crocodiles in elaborate sanctuaries. They were pampered, honored, and when they died, mummified with care. The dry dung of these sacred animals, when used in medicine, was considered potent and pure and offering as much as a treatment. In contrast, the common folk might gather crocodile dung from riverbanks or irrigation channels, drying it in the sun without ceremony. The belief was similar, but the context was not. This difference extended far beyond crocodile dung. Elite medicine included rare imported resins, minerals from distant deserts, and refined oils from prized plants. Treatments were often combined with prayers written by scribes, performed at precise times according to astronomical charts. Healing was choreographed, deliberate, and deeply tied to the household's religious identity. Consider the role of women in these elite spaces. Noble women, particularly those in the households of priests and scribes, had unusual access to medical scrolls and training. Some may have studied the workings of the body, memorized prayers for safe childbirth, and become quiet experts within their social circle. A mother might pass her knowledge down to her daughter. Not through official schooling, but through whispered rituals and private instruction. In tomb art and temple carvings, we sometimes see scenes of noble women surrounded by attendants during childbirth, a midwife present with her instruments laid out on a woven mat. Among these tools might have been ceramic vessels, fine linen strips, honeyed pastes, and yes, blended substances that may have included sacred animal products. It is also important to consider how illness was interpreted among the elite. While common people might attribute a fever to foul air or a vengeful spirit, the elite often had access to diagnostic rituals performed by temple priests. These might include reading omens, consulting the gods through oracles, or even sleeping in the temple of healing gods like Imhotep, in the hope of receiving a divine dream that would reveal the cure. In this world, medicine was inseparable from ritual status. To be healed was not only to recover, it was to be restored to proper alignment with the gods. And for those who could afford it, every aspect of healing, from the ingredients to the prayers, was elevated in quality and grandeur. But while the elite enjoyed access to more refined practices, their lives were not immune to illness. Malaria, schistosomiasis, dental abscesses, and even parasitic infections ran rampant regardless of wealth. The difference lay not in immunity, but in how sickness was treated and remembered. Elite tombs often contain inscriptions that speak of gratitude to a healer or prayers to Sobek, Sekhmet, or Thoth for restoring health. Some even mention specific ailments cured through the guidance of divine beings. Occasionally, we find medical papyri buried with the dead, perhaps to ensure health in the afterlife, or as a testament to the household's learnedness. One elite family's tomb in Thebes included a small box containing dried herbs, mineral powders, and a folded strip of linen soaked in a strange, brown substance. Analysis revealed plant oils, fermented milk proteins, and traces of reptile-derived material. Was it crocodile dung? The tests were inconclusive, but the recipe matched others known to include it, suggesting that the remedy, or some variant of it, had been cherished enough to accompany the dead on their eternal journey. Now contrast this with the lower classes. In a small riverside village, a woman with few possessions might craft her own version of the same treatment using local materials. Her ceremony would be simpler, the ingredients less rare, but the belief, the need for protection, for fertility, for balance, was the same. So much of ancient medicine was about trust, in the healer, in the gods, in the ingredients. And for the elite, that trust was reinforced by ritual, wealth, and education. They could afford certainty. Others had to make do with what they had. Yet across all levels of society, the figure of the crocodile loomed large. Whether feared as a danger or honored as a god, its presence was constant. And the idea that something from its body, its waste, no less, could heal or protect, speaks volumes about the Egyptian view of the natural world, a place where every creature had purpose, and every part of the body could hold sacred power. As we prepare to move into our next segment, we'll begin to follow one such creature more closely. We'll trace the life of the sacred crocodile itself, its role in temple life, its treatment as divine, and the rituals that surrounded its care, death, and mummification. Let your thoughts drift now, back to the gentle lapping of the Nile against a noble family's garden wall. The reeds sway softly. A crocodile watches from the water's edge, unmoving, unreadable. And somewhere within the walls of a nearby villa, a healer mixes a remedy with care, murmuring ancient words, believing in the power of nature, spirit, and the strange materials gifted by the gods. In the gentle hush of dawn, as pale light unfurls across the eastern sky, the priests of a sacred temple gather at the water's edge. The Nile gleams in the early stillness, and the temple stones, etched with prayers and divine figures, seem to glow faintly with dew. In a calm pool beside the temple, partially shaded by papyrus reeds and gently fed by the river, something stirs. A crocodile, large and ancient, lifts its broad head from the water and blinks slowly. It does not retreat. It does not strike. Instead, it watches, regal and unmoved, as the men in white linen approach. To the ancient Egyptians, the crocodile was no ordinary beast. It was Sobek incarnate, a living god. Associated with power, fertility, water, and protection, Sobek was a paradox. Both the devourer and the guardian, the terror of the Nile and its life-giving pulse. In certain cities, most famously Crocodilopolis, known in Egyptian as Shedit, near today's Fem oasis, crocodiles were raised not as threats but as divine companions. There, in quiet pools within temple precincts, sacred crocodiles were kept under the watchful care of priests. They were fed choice cuts of meat, anointed with sacred oils, and adorned with jewelry, necklaces of gold, stone amulets, and painted markings. These animals were not feared. They were revered. And their presence shaped rituals, festivals, and even medicine. Imagine the interior of the Temple of Sobek. Cool and shaded, its pillars carved with scenes of worship and healing. There is a hushed reverence here, a kind of serene expectation. Pilgrims come bearing offerings, bread, figs, incense, and small clay votives shaped like wombs or limbs or eyes, depending on what ailment they hope to cure. The temple crocodile, lying still in its pool, represents Sobek's gaze and favor. A priest sprinkles aromatic oils on the surface of the water. Another lowers a tray of prepared food, a gesture of devotion as much as sustenance. Among these rituals, there is the quiet practice of collecting and sanctifying the crocodile's waste. It may seem surprising, strange, even. But in the eyes of the ancient priesthood, nothing from the god was without meaning. Just as a lock of a deity's hair, a drop of blood, or a whisper of breath might be revered in mythology, so too was the output of this sacred beast understood to carry the essence of divine power. The dung was gathered, dried with care, and, according to temple texts, sometimes mixed with natron salts or perfumed resins. This was not an act of waste disposal, but of preservation. What others might discard, the priests saw as holy. Used sparingly, the substance might be passed on to temple healers, midwives, or scribes. It may have even been offered to nobility during fertility ceremonies, or included in protective amulets for expectant mothers. Such acts were never performed casually. A ritual surrounded each stage, from the collection of the substance to its application or distribution. Prayers were spoken. Hands were washed with lotus-scented water. Incense was burned to cleanse the space. And when the temple crocodile died, its body was mummified, wrapped in linen and buried with full honors in catacombs specially carved for its kind. Thousands of such crocodile mummies have been found across Egypt. Some lie curled gently in their wrappings, accompanied by offerings. Others, preserved in bulk, were wrapped quickly but still honored. In places like Komombo and El Minya, vast underground chambers were devoted to these creatures. The dead crocodiles were placed on wooden biers, their mouths sometimes left slightly open, as if still prepared to speak divine truths. Among the linens used to wrap them, researchers have occasionally found strange substances, pastes and powders, tucked into folds or inserted near the body. Some of these may have been ceremonial. Others, perhaps, were the very same materials used in healing rituals, including combinations of oils, minerals, and dried animal product. The idea that bodily matter from a sacred being could transmit divine power is not unique to Egypt. We see echoes of it in other ancient cultures, relics of saints, anointing oils from prophets, blood offerings to gods. But Egypt codified these ideas with remarkable consistency. Everything had purpose. Everything could heal, protect, or curse, depending on how it was treated. To the average Egyptian, the temple crocodile remained distant, both physically and symbolically. Few would have ever touched one. But their presence echoed across the land. Small amulets shaped like crocodiles were worn for protection. Some bore hieroglyphic inscriptions invoking Sobek's strength and blessings for fertility, clarity, or courage. And among those who prepared medicine, whether in grand temples or modest village homes, the idea of incorporating something from Sobek's own body into a remedy was profoundly compelling. There is no evidence that such remedies were used frequently. Crocodile dung was likely rare and reserved for specific conditions or rites. But the fact that it was used at all, and recorded in texts meant to guide generations of healers, tells us how deeply the symbolic weight of the animal-shaped Egyptian understanding of health and life. Even today, some of these mummies rest in museum collections, still wrapped, still bearing traces of their sacred roles. Some are surprisingly small, just juveniles. Others are massive, over 4 meters long. But all were treated with care. Each was part of a complex religious and medical tradition that saw no boundary between the natural world and the divine. So, next time you imagine the ancient Egyptians walking their temples and tending to their gods, picture also the slow, blinking eyes of a crocodile in a shaded pool, the quiet footsteps of a priest gathering something precious from the ground, and the gentle voice of a healer whispering prayers as she mixes a remedy drawn from both faith and nature. In the next segment of our journey, we will return to the realm of women, specifically to midwives and healers who operated outside the temples. We will explore how these women used crocodile-based remedies in daily life, how they learned their craft, and how medicine passed from one generation of women to the next. But for now, let your thoughts float upon the water, calm and slow. The sacred beast watches from the shallows. The temple sleeps. And the ancient rhythms of healing continue, quiet and unchanged. Beyond the towering columns of temples and the grand halls of palaces, Egypt's daily life pulsed in narrow alleyways, shaded courtyards, and sunlit terraces. In these domestic spaces, far from the formality of priestly rituals, healing was often the work of women. Midwives, mothers, grandmothers, all became keepers of sacred knowledge passed gently from hand to hand, word to word, and womb to womb. Here, in a quiet mud-brick home nestled along the canals of the Nile Delta, the scent of dried herbs hangs in the air. There are baskets of barley and flax, jugs of perfumed water, and bundles of dried reeds. Near the hearth, a woman sits on a woven mat, grinding dried leaves with a small, rounded stone. She hums a tune her mother once sang, its words long forgotten, its melody eternal. This is Tauret's hour, protector of women in childbirth. Her image, half hippopotamus, half lioness, adorns the walls and amulets of homes across Egypt. And in this woman's home, her statue watches over everything: the mixing bowl, the birthing mat, the infant sleeping nearby. Unlike the temple priests who dealt with sacred crocodiles and formal rituals, the women of the household worked with what they had: clay pots, linen scraps, reeds, oils, and the wisdom of their ancestors. Yet even here, in these modest surroundings, the ancient and the sacred mingled in surprising ways. Midwives, especially, were revered for their understanding of the body. They knew the signs of a healthy pregnancy, the dangers of a difficult birth, and the remedies that could soothe pain, encourage contractions, or reduce fever. Their tools were simple but effective: infusions of mint, poultices of honey and salt, rubs made from crushed onions or frankincense. And sometimes, just sometimes, their satchels contained a strange, dark powder, stored carefully in linen or tied in tiny pouches, dried crocodile dung, crumbled and mixed with herbs. This wasn't used lightly. It wasn't for a cut or a cough. Rather, it played a role in intimate, deeply symbolic practices, especially those surrounding fertility and conception. In a world without modern contraception, the control of pregnancy became a delicate dance between hope and protection. Some women longed for children, praying for Sobek's strength or Isis's grace. Others feared another mouth to feed, a body too tired to carry again. According to the Kahun Gynecological Papyrus, one of the oldest known medical texts from ancient Egypt, mixtures involving crocodile dung were sometimes inserted into the vagina as pessaries, a kind of suppository intended to either prevent pregnancy or bless a hopeful womb. The dung might be mixed with honey, natron, or fermented plant mash. Its use straddled both practical and magical realms. Why use dung in such a sensitive context? To the modern mind, it may sound implausible or even unhygienic. But consider the world the Egyptian woman inhabited. She didn't view the world in binaries of clean versus dirty, scientific versus superstitious. Everything had properties, energies, associations, symbolic meanings. Crocodiles were symbols of virility, strength, and creation. Sobek, after all, was not only a warlike god but also a fertility deity. By incorporating a fragment of his essence, be it his image, his breath, or even his waste, into a fertility treatment, the woman aligned herself with those divine forces. And beyond belief, there was the practical aspect: crocodile dung, once dried, becomes alkaline. Combined with other substances, it might have had spermicidal properties, though not reliably so. Whether this was known through trial and error or believed through symbolism is difficult to say. What is clear, however, is that it was used. Not every woman had access to crocodile dung. It was rare, and likely more common near temple cities or in households that traded with priests or healers. In other regions, alternative materials, clay, acacia gum, even dates, were substituted. But the idea persisted that the animal sacred to Sobek could influence the most personal aspects of a woman's life. The role of the midwife extended far beyond childbirth. She was an herbalist, a counselor, a quiet authority in matters of the body. She helped with miscarriages, painful menstruation, infections, and healing after labor. She might carry amulets carved in the shape of Biz or Tauret, chant protective hymns, or draw chalk symbols on the floor around the birthing mat. In some cases, a midwife might paint protective mixtures onto the abdomen of a pregnant woman, a blend of ochre, oil, and sometimes crocodile dung, believed to ward off spirits or calm the womb. As you picture this quiet world, imagine the daily rhythms of a midwife's life. Morning begins with visits. She checks on a woman 3 months along, offers a tea brewed with chamomile and myrrh. At midday, she helps deliver twins in a cramped courtyard, kneeling on reeds as sweat beads on her brow. By evening, she returns home to tend to her own children, perhaps grinding more herbs by firelight, preparing for tomorrow. Through it all, knowledge flows not through books but through voices, mothers speaking to daughters, women whispering wisdom by torchlight. In this lineage, crocodile-based medicine remains a thread, peculiar, yes, but deeply rooted in faith, experience, and reverence for the divine forces that shaped the world. Today, fragments of this legacy still echo in archaeological finds, tiny linen-wrapped bundles, stained with dark powder, amulets buried with women who died in childbirth, ancient texts carefully preserving these strange recipes. To walk in the footsteps of these women is to understand medicine not only as a science but as a sacred trust. As twilight descended over the desert, and the temples of ancient Egypt began to glow under the flickering light of oil lamps, something extraordinary would often begin within their cool, incense-laced chambers. The temples of Thebes, Edfu, and Komombo were not just places for prayer. They were sanctuaries of knowledge, repositories of healing arts, homes to the gods, and shelters for the sick. And deep within those sacred walls, beneath hieroglyphic-covered ceilings and behind lotus-shaped columns, an ancient union took place between the spiritual and the physical, the divine and the diseased. In these hallowed spaces, crocodile dung found a home, not simply as an earthy paste smeared onto wounds, but as a substance woven into sacred rites of purification and protection. It might seem shocking to us today. Why bring something so foul into a holy temple? But for the Egyptians, the physical world was not separate from the spiritual, it was a mirror of it. And in that mirror, even dung could hold divine power. Let us imagine now the careful hands of a temple priest, his skin rubbed with sacred oils, his fingers stained with ochre and natron. He opens a clay vessel, revealing a dense, dark green mixture of honey, herbs, and crocodile dung. This concoction is not for general use. It has been prepared for a specific purpose, perhaps to protect a woman in childbirth, or to anoint a statue of a deity said to ward off disease, or even to mark the doorway of a chamber where healing rituals will take place. Medical papyri like the Ebers papyrus and the Kahun gynecological papyrus don't just list treatments, they echo with ritual. They describe incantations to be spoken while applying remedies. They describe the right phases of the moon, the names of protective deities to invoke, the materials to burn or sprinkle around the patient. And in some of these remedies, the inclusion of crocodile dung is not only about the substance's perceived physical properties, it is also symbolic. In its odor, its origin, and its association with a dangerous Nile predator, it becomes a form of apotropaic magic, magic meant to avert harm. Within the walls of temple hospitals, known as houses of life, priests served as both scribes and physicians. They recorded complex prescriptions, but also carried out ceremonies. They believed illness could be caused by both natural and supernatural forces. A fever might be the result of tainted water, or the anger of a neglected god. So, healing required more than just herbs or poultices. It required restoring cosmic balance. And that, too, is where crocodile dung came in. Let us not forget that Sobek, the crocodile-headed god, was not only a fierce protector, he was also a healer. His temples often included pools for sacred crocodiles and sanctuaries where people came to seek fertility, protection, and health. To use the waste of such a creature was to harness the deity's power in a tangible way. The crocodile was strong, immune to the river's dangers, ruler of the Nile's muddy depths. His excrement, then, carried a trace of that invulnerability, at least in the symbolic mind. In one recorded temple rite, a woman struggling with repeated miscarriages might be anointed with a mixture of crocodile dung and honey, while a priest recited verses calling upon Tauret, the protective goddess of childbirth who, interestingly, was often depicted with crocodile features on her back. The mixture would be applied to the lower abdomen, sometimes alongside amulets or linen wrappings bearing spells. This was not a treatment in the modern sense, it was an offering, a prayer, a plea for balance and divine favor. In another context, crocodile dung might be burned with specific herbs in temple censers, the smoke wafting through columns as supplicants knelt in prayer. The smell, pungent and unmistakable, was believed to chase away malevolent spirits or illnesses, which the Egyptians often thought could cling to the body like dust. The temple's role was to purify, not just the soul, but the flesh. There were also stories whispered through generations of healing visions received after using such mixtures in rituals. A young boy, stricken with fever, was said to recover after being treated with a salve of dung, frankincense, and sycamore fig sap, applied while his mother knelt beside a statue of Atha. Whether these were coincidences or the result of immune responses, the stories reinforced belief in the practice. And belief, in such a world, was as powerful as any ingredient. In many of these temple-based treatments, crocodile dung functioned not as a primary medicine, but as a bridge between the physical and the divine, between the patient and the gods. When applied with intention, surrounded by chants and incense, and within the walls of a holy site, its meaning expanded beyond its source. It became an element of transformation. This holistic view of health, that sickness touched the body and soul, and that healing involved both potions and prayers, is something that resonates even today. We still speak of healing environments. We still light candles in hospitals, pray in waiting rooms, speak soothing words at bedsides. The Egyptians simply formalized these instincts, made them sacred. And sometimes, the strangest ingredients were the most potent symbols. By the time of the New Kingdom, these temple rites had become more elaborate, involving not only priests but scribes, musicians, and midwives. The healing ritual might be timed with the movement of stars or the flooding of the Nile. A woman receiving a fertility blessing could expect to be washed, anointed, and perhaps even symbolically impregnated with a poultice containing not just crocodile dung but oils, resins, and milk. It was a complex choreography, a healing drama staged between gods and mortals. And so, as the oil lamps burned low and the chant softened into whispers, the crocodile's presence lingered, not in tooth or claw, but in the humble smear of dung applied with reverence. A reminder that even in the darkest, least expected materials, the Egyptians believed healing could be found. So tonight, as we leave this segment of history behind, think not just of what they used, but of why they used it. The Egyptians did not turn to such strange remedies out of ignorance. They did so out of a profound, poetic logic. A logic that said, if something comes from power, from the sacred, from the river that gives us life, then it too might carry the ability to restore us. And perhaps, in the quiet night of an ancient temple, surrounded by flickering flame and silent statues, it did. In the quiet corridors of ancient Egyptian medicine, few areas were as deeply layered with ritual, emotion, and secrecy as those concerning the mysteries of fertility, conception, and childbirth. The Egyptians revered the womb as a vessel of divine continuation, a chamber where the gods might breathe new life into the world. And as such, when that sacred process faltered or became dangerous, they turned not only to their knowledge of anatomy and herbs but also to sacred substances, including, rather unexpectedly, crocodile dung. This segment takes us into the intimate heart of ancient Egyptian reproductive medicine, where the logic of the natural world intertwined with the sacred, and where the feared Nile crocodile, through its very excrement, was transformed into an unlikely midwife. Let us begin with the Kahun Papyrus, a medical manuscript dating back to around 1800 BCE, often considered the oldest known gynecological text. Within its faded pages are dozens of treatments, some startling, some curiously methodical. The papyrus doesn't merely offer recipes for remedies, it reveals a worldview in which the female body was carefully observed and actively treated. It describes various conditions: irregular menstruation, difficulties in conception, and complications during labor. And scattered among these scrolls are references to dung, often from crocodiles, used in both diagnosis and treatment. Why crocodile dung, specifically, and not just any other kind of animal waste? The answer, as always in ancient Egypt, is layered. First, there is symbolic association. The crocodile was feared and revered, a creature tied to the river that gave Egypt life. As a liminal animal, living on land and in water, it represented power over boundaries. Of life and death, fertility and barrenness. The idea, perhaps, was that by incorporating its essence, one might draw strength from those same liminal forces. In this view, crocodile dung wasn't filth, it was a concentrated essence of fertility and protection. One of the most referenced uses of crocodile dung in reproductive medicine was as a contraceptive, a practice that seems utterly shocking to us now, but was taken quite seriously in its time. A common method involved mixing crocodile dung with fermented dough or honey and inserting the mixture vaginally. This, the Egyptians believed, could create a physical and spiritual barrier to conception. The mixture was thought to block semen, absorb harmful spirits, and confuse malevolent forces that might try to disrupt the delicate process of reproduction. Modern science, of course, is skeptical of the effectiveness of such a practice. Yet some researchers have noted that the dung's alkaline nature might have had a mild spermicidal effect, although this remains speculative. More likely, its significance was ritualistic, meant to invoke the crocodile's power and protect the womb. Perhaps it was not so different, in principle, from the use of amulets, spells, and charms placed around the home or body. Interestingly, while dung was used to prevent conception in some cases, in others it was used to promote it. The contradiction is telling. It reveals that the ancient Egyptians didn't think of medicine in binary terms. Substances could have different effects depending on how, when, and by whom they were applied. Crocodile dung, when prepared in a certain way and spoken over with specific incantations, might act as a fertility booster. When used differently, it might serve to prevent pregnancy. There were even diagnostic uses of such substances. One test for pregnancy described in Egyptian texts involved placing a mixture of ingredients, sometimes including dung, inside the vagina and observing changes to its texture or smell over the course of days. If it changed in a certain way, pregnancy was suspected. It's difficult to say how effective such tests were, but they represent a logical attempt to read the body using available tools, an early form of empirical observation shaped by ritual understanding. Childbirth itself was an especially dangerous and sacred process. Mothers faced significant risks from infection, hemorrhage, and complications. And since the boundary between life and death felt especially thin during delivery, many protective substances were used during labor, including, occasionally, crocodile dung. It might be smeared on the mother's belly, burned nearby to drive off evil, or mixed with other ingredients and administered vaginally to assist with delivery. The goddess Tauret, protector of women and children, was central to such rituals. As a pregnant hippopotamus with the limbs of a lion and the tail of a crocodile, her hybrid body symbolized strength and maternal protection. To use crocodile dung in her name was not just medicinal, it was devotional. It was a way to bring her presence into the birthing chamber. In fact, some researchers believe that certain fertility rites might have involved symbolic mimicry of creation, including smearing mixtures that resembled the primordial mud from which life was said to have emerged. Crocodile dung, dense and fertile, could have represented that sacred mud, the chaotic, fertile beginnings from which the gods formed the world. By applying it to the body, especially near the womb, women symbolically aligned themselves with that first act of creation. There is also some evidence that men, too, used crocodile dung mixtures in attempts to enhance fertility. Though less frequently described, some texts refer to rituals where both partners were treated or purified in tandem, perhaps to ensure that the union was spiritually balanced. In such cases, the dung was not seen as something to remove or wash away, but something that temporarily protected and transformed. But of course, not everyone had access to temple physicians or sacred knowledge. Among village midwives and local healers, the practice of using animal dung, including from crocodiles, was likely more practical and instinctual. In regions near the Nile where crocodiles were more common, their waste would have been easily accessible. And so, a midwife might use what she had, combining dung with honey, herbs, or ash, creating her own blend of protection, passed down orally rather than recorded in scrolls. One can imagine a dimly lit home, where a mother groans in labor as neighbors whisper prayers. A midwife, her face lined by years of experience, opens a clay pot and removes a pungent, earthy mixture. She applies it gently, perhaps muttering a half-remembered hymn to Isis. In that moment, crocodile dung is not merely an ingredient. It is a lifeline, a belief, a prayer, and an attempt to harness the mysterious forces that govern life itself. Even after childbirth, crocodile dung might be used to help the new mother recover, applied to swollen areas, mixed into salves to ease pain, or burned to purify the room. It could also be used to mark the threshold of the home, to prevent evil spirits from entering while the mother and infant remain vulnerable. And while such practices may seem strange to us now, they speak to a universal truth, that in times of uncertainty and danger, humans reach for what they understand, symbols of power, tools of tradition, elements from nature that carry meaning beyond their form. Crocodile dung, in all its strangeness, was part of that toolkit. A link to the river, the gods, and the untamable wild. As the Nile flowed on, so too did these rituals, passed from scribe to healer, from mother to daughter, adapting, surviving. And in those traditions, messy and sacred all at once, we glimpse the deep, poetic logic of ancient Egyptian medicine. Not everything they did was effective in the modern sense. But everything they did made sense to them. And sometimes, perhaps, that sense of ritual, of connection, of meaning, is as vital to healing as any herb or pill. Let your eyes close gently now, as we leave behind the whispers of the midwife, the chants of the priest, and the quiet power of the crocodile, watching from the Nile. As we drift further away from the candlelit temples and linen-wrapped remedies of ancient Egypt, we now turn to a very different kind of sanctuary, the modern laboratory. In this segment, we'll explore how today's scientists, historians of medicine, and microbiologists interpret the medicinal use of crocodile dung. What does modern science say about the efficacy, or dangers, of this peculiar substance once considered sacred? When archaeologists and papyrologists began translating medical texts from ancient Egypt, including the famous Ebers Papyrus and Kahun Gynecological Papyrus, they were surprised to encounter numerous references to animal feces being used for treatments. Among these, crocodile dung stood out not only for its frequent mention but also for its connection to reproductive health, particularly contraception. At first glance, the idea seemed absurd. Feces are a well-known vector for disease in the modern world. How could something so potentially harmful be used as a medical agent? To understand this, researchers had to set aside modern assumptions and examine ancient practices through the lens of their own time. The earliest serious scientific analyses of these remedies date back to the early 20th century. Western scholars, many working out of European institutions with colonial ties to Egypt, examined samples collected from mummified remains, embalming jars, and preserved medical instruments. They sought to detect chemical signatures and microbial residues that could give insight into what the Egyptians believed these treatments achieved, and whether they could actually work. A number of hypotheses began to form. First, researchers considered the pH theory. Crocodile dung, particularly when fresh or semi-dried, is alkaline. Some modern contraceptive gels are also alkaline, which can create an environment hostile to sperm. Could it be that ancient Egyptians accidentally stumbled upon a crude form of spermicide? While this theory is compelling, studies have shown mixed results. Experiments using animal dung in vitro, under controlled laboratory conditions, did show that certain components, such as bile acids and digestive enzymes, could slow or immobilize sperm movement. However, they also introduced significant risks of infection, inflammation, and vaginal damage. Modern microbiologists were especially concerned with pathogenic bacteria present in feces. Even dry dung can harbor harmful microbes like E. coli, Salmonella, and Clostridium, all of which pose serious health threats. Applying these substances to broken skin or mucous membranes would have almost certainly resulted in infections, some of them potentially life-threatening. Yet, there's an interesting twist. Some researchers pointed out that sun-dried dung, as the Egyptians likely used, would undergo partial sterilization due to UV exposure and heat. This doesn't eliminate all risk, but it might have reduced the microbial load enough to make occasional use survivable, if not safe by modern standards. Then there's the psychological angle. Could the efficacy of crocodile dung treatments have come from the power of belief rather than any chemical property? Many scholars think so. In a society where medicine was inseparable from magic, rituals, and divine intervention, the act of applying a symbolic material like crocodile dung may have provided a powerful placebo effect, a real sense of healing induced by the expectation of divine aid. Modern psychology supports this idea. Placebo effects are well documented and can result in measurable changes in pain levels, anxiety, and even physical symptoms. The elaborate rituals surrounding the use of crocodile dung, chants, prayers, incense, could have strengthened this psychological response, making patients genuinely feel better, even if no pharmacological benefit was present. In recent decades, scientists have also begun exploring whether animal waste might have antimicrobial properties in certain contexts. Some dung, particularly that of herbivores, contains metabolites that can inhibit bacterial growth. Unfortunately, crocodiles are carnivores, and their digestive systems are geared toward breaking down animal protein, which results in feces that are far more toxic and less useful medicinally. This further weakens the idea that crocodile dung offered any consistent antimicrobial benefit. Despite this, a small number of researchers have entertained the possibility that ancient Egyptian healers might have used the dung as a binding agent or carrier substance rather than as an active ingredient. In other words, it might have been a medium for delivering more effective ingredients, such as honey, natron, or medicinal oils, into the body. If so, the dung's role was less about its own properties and more about supporting the texture or placement of other substances. In the glow of flickering oil lamps, nestled within clay walls softened by Nile silt and thyme, Egyptian households prepared for sleep. Yet not every home contained a healer, and not every woman had access to the same remedies. In this segment, we explore an essential question: were treatments involving crocodile dung widely available to all classes of Egyptian society, or were they the guarded privilege of the elite? To answer this, we must consider the structure of Egyptian society and the way medicine was practiced and transmitted. While Egypt's medical knowledge was remarkably advanced for its time, it was not equally distributed. Physicians were often trained within temple complexes, centers not only of worship but also of learning. These houses of life, such as those at Heliopolis or Thebes, served as repositories of knowledge, with scrolls and oral instruction available to a select few. These physician priests were typically male, but the medical care of women, particularly concerning fertility, menstruation, and childbirth was often entrusted to midwives and lay healers, many of them women themselves. It's within this more informal realm that we likely see the broader use of remedies involving crocodile dung. Though temple medicine might preserve and record recipes in papyrus scrolls, the practical application of these formulas happened in homes, among families, and with the help of women trained through experience and oral tradition rather than formal schooling. Crocodiles were part of the everyday landscape, both feared and respected. Their dung, though unpleasant to handle, was a byproduct that needed no trade route or coin. It could be collected by anyone daring, or desperate enough to approach the muddy riverbanks where crocodiles basked and defecated. Because of this accessibility, crocodile dung became a rare example of a democratic ingredient in an otherwise stratified medical landscape. Its presence in both elite medical texts and presumed folk practice suggests that its use bridged the gap between high and low, rich and poor. Whether prepared in a marble-floored chamber of a priest-physician or mixed with honey by a midwife in a reed-roofed village hut, its role remained consistent, to serve the needs of women's bodies, especially in the realm of fertility. But this democratization did not necessarily translate to uniform safety or effectiveness. In wealthier homes, ingredients were carefully measured and recipes followed precisely, perhaps even ritually. Among the lower classes, mixtures were more improvised, passed through oral memory, and dependent on what could be obtained or afforded. And so, while the use of crocodile dung might have been widespread, the context and quality of its use varied significantly. There's also the matter of belief and symbolism. For rural families who worshipped Sobek or feared his wrath, using crocodile dung may have carried spiritual significance beyond its medicinal application. It might have been seen not just as a barrier against conception or disease, but as a talisman of protection, an invocation of divine fertility or ferocity, depending on one's need. In the dim corridors of Egypt's social pyramid, medicine reflected both division and commonality. Crocodile dung, of all things, stands as a curious unifier, a lowly substance tied to a powerful deity, straddling temple and village, ritual and remedy. And now, as the Nile breeze whispers across the reeds, we move gently onward. The story of crocodile dung is far from over. In the next segment, we'll step into the realm of skepticism and science. What did ancient critics, if any, say about these practices? And what might modern researchers make of such curious remedies today? Though ancient Egyptian society was deeply spiritual, ritualistic, and highly deferential to tradition, especially in medicine, it would be incorrect to assume that every citizen or healer accepted all remedies without question. In this segment, we turn our attention to the often overlooked undercurrent of doubt that may have existed even in such a reverent culture. Were there ancient skeptics who questioned the use of crocodile dung in healing? Did all Egyptians trust in its powers, or were there whispers of concern beneath the chants of priests and scribes? To begin with, it's important to acknowledge the absence of overt criticism in surviving papyri. Medical texts like the Ebers Papyrus and the Kahun Gynecological Papyrus are prescriptive, not discursive. They present treatments as established truth rather than as subjects for debate. But this lack of criticism in writing does not necessarily reflect unanimous belief. Literacy was limited, and the written record represents a narrow slice of elite, state-sanctioned medical thought. The voices of ordinary people, those who experienced, rejected, or adapted these remedies, remain largely silent in the archaeological record. Still, we can make some inferences. For example, there is evidence that some remedies were used only in specific regions or among certain social groups. This suggests variation in acceptance, perhaps even suspicion or rejection in some communities. A woman in a delta village might have eagerly accepted crocodile dung as a contraceptive, while another, inland and distant from Sobek's domain, might have found the idea distasteful or ineffective and turned instead to other herbal options or spiritual invocations. We also know that Egyptian medicine sometimes included incantations meant not only to heal but to defend against incorrect treatments. These magical phrases often acknowledge the possibility of ineffective or even harmful remedies. That such protective spells existed implies an awareness, however subtle, that medical practices were not infallible. Moreover, skepticism could come in the form of alternative beliefs. In a society where health was intertwined with the will of the gods, illness was often seen as a punishment or a test. Some Egyptians may have believed that seeking out medicine, especially using animal waste, interfered with divine judgment or fate. For these individuals, prayer and ritual cleansing may have been seen as preferable to physical treatments. There may also have been debates within the medical community itself. The training of temple physicians was rigorous, and disagreements likely existed between those who favored different schools of thought. Perhaps there were whispered rivalries between practitioners of purely herbal medicine and those who relied more heavily on animal-derived substances like dung, fat, or bile. These rivalries, while not preserved explicitly in writing, must have shaped the evolution of Egyptian medical practice. And then, of course, there was lived experience. If a treatment worked, or at least seemed to, faith in it would grow. If it failed or caused discomfort, trust could be shaken. In this way, skepticism might not have been philosophical or doctrinal, but practical. A mother applying a crocodile dung pessary and seeing no result might quietly decline to try it again, favoring instead the whispered advice of her grandmother or neighbor. While we lack direct records of ancient critics raising their voices against the use of crocodile dung, the diversity of practices, regional variation, protective spells, and evolution of medical recipes all suggest that Egyptian society, like any human society, contained a spectrum of belief. Within that spectrum, doubt quietly coexisted with devotion. As we leave behind the temples, scrolls, and whispers of ancient Egypt, we enter the realm of modern science, a world of laboratories, microscopes, and peer-reviewed studies. Here, the soothing chants of priests are replaced with the hum of centrifuges, and crocodile dung is no longer a divine gift, but a biological sample subject to analysis. In this segment, we gently examine what contemporary researchers have discovered or speculated about this peculiar ancient remedy. To begin, it's important to clarify that very little modern research has focused specifically on crocodile dung in the context of medicine. Most academic attention has gone to the more general topic of ancient contraception, and within that field, crocodile dung often appears as a curious footnote. Still, the references are intriguing enough to warrant scientific curiosity. One of the primary reasons this practice has drawn attention is that crocodile dung was not used randomly. Its selection may have been based on more than just symbolic value. Crocodile feces, like that of many reptiles, is alkaline in nature. Some researchers have proposed that when mixed with acidic ingredients, such as fermented milk, honey, or even sour beer, it could have altered the pH of the vaginal canal, potentially creating an environment less conducive to sperm survival. However, this theory is speculative at best. There's no definitive evidence that the alkalinity of crocodile dung was high enough, or that the mixtures were consistent enough, to have a reliable contraceptive effect. More concerningly, the introduction of animal feces into the body poses obvious risks. The potential for infection, inflammation, or long-term damage would likely have outweighed any theoretical contraceptive benefit, particularly if the material was not adequately dried or sterilized. Modern gynecology has also noted that physical barriers, such as pastes or plugs, could provide rudimentary contraception by blocking sperm. Crocodile dung mixed with honey or resin might have created a physical barrier, not unlike the ancient Roman use of wool soaked in oils or the later European use of beeswax-based plugs. This raises the possibility that even if the dung's chemical properties were ineffective or harmful, its consistency may have provided some mechanical prevention of conception. Beyond contraceptive use, the idea that crocodile dung had antimicrobial properties has also surfaced. In modern studies, some animal excrement has shown a surprising presence of antibacterial compounds, likely part of the animal's own immune defense system. Crocodiles, known to survive grievous injuries in unsanitary conditions, may harbor microbiomes with properties we're only beginning to understand. This has led a few researchers to speculate, again, very cautiously, that the ancient Egyptians might have stumbled upon substances that had some biological benefit, even if they didn't fully understand why. Yet, despite these possibilities, the modern scientific consensus remains skeptical. Most archaeologists, historians of medicine, and microbiologists agree that the use of crocodile dung was probably symbolic or cultural more than effective. The practice reflects more about the belief systems, cosmology, and ritual habits of the ancient world than it does about empirical medicine. Still, the fact that such a practice existed and persisted is a reminder of the experimental nature of early human medicine. People observed, adapted, shared, and preserved what they thought worked, often layering their remedies with spiritual meaning and divine association. In this way, crocodile dung is less a failure of medicine than a window into how humans once tried, desperately and ingeniously, to understand and control the mysteries of life and fertility. As we let this knowledge settle like silt on the bottom of the Nile, we prepare to drift onward. Our next segment takes us beyond Egypt, to compare this unusual substance with other ancient remedies around the world. What other strange substances have people used in pursuit of healing? As we drift away from the crocodile-haunted banks of the Nile, we begin to glimpse the broader landscape of ancient medicine, a patchwork of cultures, each weaving its own curious remedies from the world around them. And in this twilight of logic and law, we find that ancient Egyptians were far from alone in their use of unusual, even repulsive, substances in the pursuit of healing. Across the ancient world, medicine was rarely clean or comforting. It was, more often than not, experimental, spiritual, and deeply rooted in trial and error. Practitioners used whatever was close at hand, plants, minerals, animal parts, and bodily fluids, without the benefit of germ theory or modern pharmacology. Let's begin in ancient Mesopotamia, where medical texts etched into clay tablets speak of treatments involving snake skin, crushed insects, and even goat urine. Illness was often believed to be caused by malevolent spirits or divine punishment, and thus treatments merged practical applications with incantations and rituals. Goat urine was used as a cleanser, a fever remedy, and a poultice base, just as crocodile dung might have been used for its texture as much as its supposed potency. Meanwhile, in ancient India, the practice of Ayurveda included elaborate herbal systems, but it too incorporated some eyebrow-raising components. Cow dung and urine, for example, were considered sacred substances, believed to contain purifying energies. Cow urine was used to treat everything from epilepsy to skin disorders. To the modern eye, such remedies seem unsanitary, but within their cultural and spiritual framework, they were logical and even revered. China, too, had its own collection of peculiar prescriptions. The famed Shenong Bencao Jing, one of the earliest pharmacological texts, included entries for bak guano, dried human feces, and fermented animal parts. These substances were ground, boiled, or dissolved into tonics, believed to influence the balance of yin and yang or unblock meridians. Much like crocodile dung in Egypt, these ingredients were chosen for both their physical characteristics and their symbolic resonance within the cosmology of the time. In ancient Greece, physicians like Hippocrates were beginning to break away from divine explanations of disease, yet even they used strange remedies by today's standards. For instance, menstrual blood was sometimes used in amulets for healing, and animal excrement was used in poultices to draw out infections. Pliny the Elder, a Roman naturalist, wrote extensively about the use of dung from various animals, including dogs, cows, pigeons, and geese, to treat burns, fevers, and gout. Even in the early Islamic Golden Age, when medicine became more systematized and scientific, older folk practices persisted. Camel urine, for instance, was used in Bedouin communities as a treatment for skin conditions and even internal ailments, a practice that continues in some parts of the world today. What these global traditions share is a deep commitment to observation, tradition, and symbolism. Each society took the raw materials of its environment and filtered them through the lens of culture, belief, and necessity. Whether it was crocodile dung, cow urine, but feces, or snake bile, people sought healing with what they understood, however incomplete that understanding may have been. It's easy, from a modern perspective, to dismiss these ancient remedies as superstition or folly. But when we pause to consider the challenges faced by early humans, plagues, childbirth, injury, infertility, we may also see their creativity, resilience, and the beginnings of medical curiosity. Without microscopes or sterile labs, they had only their senses, stories, and courage to guide them. As the stars rise over this vast panorama of human experimentation, we return gently to Egypt, where our story will soon draw to a close. But first, let us look inward, at the symbolic power of crocodiles and their divine connections. In the next segment, we will explore the spiritual and religious dimensions of crocodiles in Egyptian belief, how they were feared, worshipped, and perhaps even loved. This deeper context may explain why their waste was not merely tolerated, but cherished. As we continue floating gently down the Nile of memory and imagination, we approach one of the more mysterious elements of our journey: why crocodiles? Why would a creature so terrifying, so powerful, and so deadly become not only a symbol of divinity but also a source of healing in ancient Egyptian medicine? In this segment, we delve into the symbolic and spiritual importance of crocodiles in ancient Egyptian culture, and how their status may have influenced the use of their dung in medicine. Crocodiles were not merely dangerous animals to the Egyptians, they were divine avatars, physical manifestations of a higher power. Chief among these was Sobek, the crocodile-headed god, who represented the might of the pharaoh, the fertility of the Nile, and the protection of the people. Sobek was both feared and revered, a deity who could bring destruction but also shield the faithful. His presence was intimately tied to the life-giving waters of the Nile, and by extension, to the prosperity of the kingdom. Sobek was worshipped most fervently in Fem, a region known for its many crocodiles and sacred lakes. Here, real crocodiles were kept in temples, adorned with jewelry, fed by priests, and even mummified after death. These were not mere animals but living representatives of the divine, to be treated with the utmost respect. In such a world, the use of crocodile dung in medicine takes on a new layer of meaning. It was not just a convenient material, it was a sacred substance, part of a holy animal. To incorporate it into a treatment was perhaps to channel the protective power of Sobek himself. Much like relics in later religious traditions, the physical remains of holy beings were thought to carry spiritual force. Crocodile waste, in this view, was more than waste, it was medicine imbued with divine protection. Moreover, ancient Egyptian thought did not draw a sharp line between the physical and spiritual realms. Disease could be caused by both earthly and supernatural forces, evil spirits, curses, or divine displeasure. A remedy that invoked a deity, even indirectly through a sacred animal's byproduct, would have had both medical and magical potency. This might explain why crocodile dung was used particularly in the context of fertility and contraception. Sobek, as a god of virility and fertility, would be a natural figure to invoke in treatments involving reproduction. His association with the life-giving Nile reinforced the idea that he governed both the flow of water and the flow of life. To apply a remedy derived from his sacred animal was to place oneself under his protection, whether to prevent an unwanted pregnancy or to ensure the safe arrival of a child. This spiritual dimension would also affect how the dung was handled. It may have been collected from specific animals in temple precincts, perhaps even with ritual care or prayers. It's conceivable that such remedies were blessed or purified before use, transforming the repulsive into the redemptive, the dirty into the divine. Yet, reverence was not universal. Just as crocodiles inspired worship, they also inspired terror. In other parts of Egypt, they were feared and hunted, and their presence was a source of anxiety rather than awe. This duality mirrors the complex role of many animals in ancient religion. They were symbols of chaos and control, death and rebirth, curse and cure. It's a reminder that ancient Egyptian medicine was not merely practical, but profoundly symbolic. The physical ingredients were only part of the cure. What mattered equally was their cosmic resonance, how they connected the body to the gods, the earth to the heavens. As the segment closes, imagine yourself standing in the cool hush of a temple, incense curling into the dusk, the distant splash of a crocodile echoing through sacred waters. Here, medicine was a kind of prayer, and even the waste of a predator could become a blessing. As the Nile's waters meander softly through Egypt's landscape, winding their way through reeds and fields, they carry with them echoes not only of ancient gods and forgotten rituals but of shared human patterns. The story of crocodile dung in Egyptian medicine is not isolated. It forms a part of a broader tapestry, one in which animal-based remedies have appeared across continents and millennia, practiced by diverse peoples in pursuit of healing. In this segment, we stretch our historical gaze beyond the banks of the Nile, exploring how other ancient civilizations turned to the animal kingdom for answers and how these traditions intersected, diverged, and transformed over time. Imagine yourself now walking along a dusty road not far from an ancient Indian temple. The air is warm, the scent of incense drifting from a nearby shrine. Within the Ayurveda tradition, which predates much of Greek and Roman medicine, animal substances held a unique place. Cow dung and urine were, and still are in some practices, believed to hold purifying qualities. These were not simply agricultural byproducts but were considered offerings of the sacred cow, a being deeply revered. They were used in poultices, mixed into balms, and sometimes even consumed in highly diluted forms as part of ritual detoxifications. Though far removed from the crocodiles of the Nile, the spiritual framing is familiar. Let us now drift further east, to the misty mountain temples of ancient China. Traditional Chinese medicine, developed over centuries of keen observation and experimentation, also leaned upon animal-based components. Tiger bones, seahorses, bear bile, each was believed to affect the body's internal energies or qi. The idea, much like in ancient Egypt, was not merely about the physical properties of the substance, but its symbolic power, its energetic essence. Tiger bones were for courage and strength. Seahorses were seen as potent tonics, bear bile for clearing heat from the body. In Mesoamerica, long before European contact, the Aztecs and Mayans had their own pantheon of animal cures. Some lizards were dried and ground into powders. Insects were used for their perceived magical and medicinal qualities. The Spanish chroniclers of the 16th century often reacted with astonishment, sometimes revulsion, at the remedies they encountered, failing to understand the symbolic richness and observational logic that underpinned them. In medieval Europe, we encounter the doctrine of signatures, a belief that nature marked plants and animals with signs indicating their use. If a creature looked like a body part or shared certain symbolic traits, it might be used to treat related ailments. Toads and their secretions were used in various concoctions, particularly for skin diseases. Swallow nests were believed to promote health and vitality. Even powdered mummy, imported from Egypt, became a bizarre but popular remedy among the European elite, a grim twist on Egyptian funerary tradition. Returning to crocodile dung, then, we can begin to place it within a global frame. It was not simply an eccentric practice of one ancient civilization. Rather, it was part of a human inclination to look to the natural world, particularly the animal world, for salvation. Crocodiles, fierce and eternal seeming, carried connotations of strength, protection, and fertility. Using their dung in medicine, especially in contexts related to birth and protection, was an extension of these associations. In many of these societies, the physical properties of the substance were less important than the perceived energetic or symbolic ones. Crocodile dung may have been valued for its consistency, its earthy smell, its association with water and power, all of which played into Egyptian understandings of fertility and divine protection. And there is something deeply human in that. Throughout history, people have faced illness with fear, with reverence, and with creativity. They have listened to their elders, observed the animals around them, made inferences, experimented, and refined. While modern medicine relies on controlled trials and molecular analyses, these ancient systems were rooted in centuries of observation and tradition. Though they may not align with contemporary scientific standards, they reveal a deep engagement with the world, an effort to decode its mysteries, to harness its power, and to comfort the sick and the fearful. In modern times, science has often dismissed these ancient remedies as superstition. Yet, increasingly, researchers are returning to traditional pharmacopoeias with fresh eyes. Some remedies once scorned are now being investigated for antimicrobial properties or unique chemical compounds. For instance, the use of frog skins, long practiced by various Amazonian tribes, has inspired research into painkillers and antibiotics. Even animal feces, strange as it may sound, are being re-evaluated. In some modern therapies, such as fecal microbiota transplants, the human gut's microbial balance is restored using donor material, a concept that would have seemed strangely familiar to a priest-physician of Thebes. Thus, crocodile dung, and the many substances like it, are more than just historical curiosities. They are part of an ongoing dialogue between humans and nature, between experience and inquiry, between belief and knowledge. They reflect the age-old question, what can we use, what can we trust, when the body falters and the night grows long? As you lie still, consider the enduring ingenuity of our ancestors. Imagine their hands mixing herbs and powders by lamplight, their whispered prayers to gods whose names we no longer speak, the careful application of salves, the watching and waiting. They did not have all the answers. Neither do we. But in both their remedies and ours, there is hope, hope for relief, for recovery, for continuity. The world of ancient medicine is not so far away. Its echoes remain in the rituals we still perform, the questions we still ask, the natural world we still look toward. The crocodiles of the Nile still bask in the sun, much as they did when their dung was mixed into medicines meant to protect and preserve. Time flows onward, yet some patterns, like the river, repeat. And now, as this segment comes to a close, let your thoughts drift gently like a papyrus boat on a calm current. You've walked through time, across continents and cultures, exploring a world where animals were more than creatures, they were healers, protectors, symbols, and sacred tools. Rest now. There is more to come, but for now, let sleep begin to weave its ancient magic.